Thank you all so much for joining for this exciting panel discussion on the thriving advantage, unlocking systemic impact through coaching. My name is Kate McIver. I'm COO of WisdomWorks, a social enterprise dedicated to creating a world where everyone can thrive. And we are very excited to be hosting this conversation also in June, which, if you didn't already know, is World Workplace Wellbeing Month, which is hosted by the Global Wellness Institute Workplace Wellbeing Initiative, of which myself, my fellow panelist Caitlin is also part of. Renee was one of the original founders, and I see other members of the initiative here. So great to see that being celebrated and you all joining us today. And as we were having conversations, we really think, how can we strategically support an people's organizations' capacity to thrive? And one of the ways in which we do that is through coaching. And so when we were thinking about the type of conversation that we might want to have, how could coaching, if used strategically, really facilitate thriving for people, businesses, and the planet? And so we're so excited to have this panel help us just explore what are the possibilities and what could transpire. And so today we have joining us Breeze Dong, an enterprise leadership coach and organizational development practitioner who is based in Switzerland but currently joining us from London. Thanks so much for joining in the middle of your night. And then we have two panelists that are joining us from various places in Australia. We have Sandra Colhando, an executive coach and inclusion champion, and Caitlin Guilfoyl, a modern work leader and leadership coach who also serves on the initiative with me. And then, of course, last but not least, we have WisdomWorks CEO Renee Moorefield and Master Certified Coach. She's going to be helping moderate this conversation. And so I am now going to hand it over to her so we can get going. Renee, over to you.
Thank you, Kate. And I am just thrilled that we're all together. And, you never know how many people are going to come to a group. And when I see this intimate group, it makes it great because we can now have lots of conversation in this, not as much presentation. This truly is about exploring the power of coaching for more whole systems change, for more systemic impact. So, to frame our work together today, I want to make three primary points just to kind of frame this conversation and before I ask the panelists a couple of questions. The first point is for many reasons, whether it's the rise of AI, whether it's divisiveness around the world, whether it's changes in political environments, whether it's more high-tech changes. For many reasons, the world feels different now to many people than it did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, yesterday. Like it feels like things are changing that rapidly. And we see this with the clients we work with. They're talking about this a lot. We're all seeing this on the media a lot. I've even heard the term, we are in a midst of global inflammation, where we are a more inflamed world. So that's the first point to frame our conversation. Secondly, for many people in organization, this feels very much like a time of crisis, a, a crisis of operating, a crisis of how we are in the world, a crisis of meaning, and for some organizations and some people, a crisis of existence, an existential crisis. So that's the second major point. So these points are not going to all be downers, by the way. So here's my third point. So the third point is we have an innate potential, an innate capacity to thrive that is hardwired within human beings, these natural capacities. And these capacities are a foundation for our ability to transform. So I think this time is calling us to tap into these capacities to thrive in a much more profound and deliberate way than ever before, at the individual level, at the team level, at the organizational level, and societally. Coaching has been a powerful avenue for helping people tap into that capacity. Most coaching up until recently was really done in one on one settings, a one on one, confidential, safe place for transformative human development. And more recently, for teams, team coaching has become popular. Our exploration today, and I will say exploration, I really double click on that word to say exploration because no one has the right answer to how can coaching be used truly for systemic impact, systemic change. And we could not have three better people to be exploring this topic out loud. We're going to do that for about 30 minutes or so, and Kate's going to make sure we don't run over so that we have plenty of time for Q&A and back and forth. So I will start. And Caitlin, I want to start with you first. How might coaching transcend individual development to become a catalyst for systemic organizational change? Again, no right answers to these questions. Just what's your current think?
Good. Thank you.
Yeah,
So thank you so much, Renee, for that framing. I think the framing is really important, and that's where I wanted to start as well. Is understanding the context in which we are all operating in globally at the moment, the pace of change, the complexity, the uncertainty, the ambiguity, and these words we talk about so much. And coaching is such a wonderful lever to use, but when we use it on one person, it is such a transformational impact on that one person. And I think what our conversation today invites us to consider is when we know the power that it can have on individuals, how can we use it to be able to meet some of the conditions in which we're operating in and at a more transformational and wider level? And I think what is nice and what we've seen seeds of is, when even when we coach groups of leaders, we see the impact that that has on others. And we're not talking just about the individuals, but we're talking about the environment in which they're operating in. And then further on, what the impact is just outside of their work, in their lives, in their communities, the changes that they make as individuals and how that changes, how they operate throughout their world. And that is, I think, what is really on my mind at the moment is when we are dealing with so much disconnection in communities and so much uncertainty, how can we really start to understand when we see those things happen so well, how do we use that and we start to expand it because we know that it has the ability to really help some of the challenges that we're seeing at the moment on such a huge level.
yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Breeze, I wonder if you want to add anything to this particular question.
Yeah, thank you, Renee, for inviting me. And when I hear about the topic, especially the systemic connection and using coaching as a catalyst, I immediately said yes, such a valuable topic. While Caitlin, you're speaking, I resonate very much that the depth of coaching could actually open up someone's not only the self awareness but also system awareness. For me, one part, of course, is about the depth and the quality of coaching. There's another aspect, in my view, is how coaching is used. Um, how coaching is used so that coaching, if we apply it in a more systemic way, say in an organizational setting, um, in a more like large scale, um, could actually bring that effort to a larger scale so that the coaching method could already become a strategic lever in a transformation effort. Or actually, what I would like to think is to bring a cultural, let's say, a cultural shift into the organizational DNA if we could embrace coaching at a larger scale, more systemically. Yeah, that's part what I'm reflecting on.
Yeah,
Back
I
to you, Renee.
appreciate that reflection because and I know given the work we've done together in the past, the experience you're drawing from too. about using coaching in as a lever for cultural change. So thank you for making that connection. I really appreciate that. Sandra, how about you? What are your thoughts or feelings about this question? You're on mute.
Thanks, Renee. I think it's a beautiful and rich conversation to be part of. I remember when I got into my coaching journey a decade and a half ago, coaching was so new. We had to talk about why coaching is important and why we need to have one-on-one interaction to make the change happen. And now we're kind of moving towards systemic coaching and systemic organization development and how do we take that one-to-one transformation to an organization level. So it's really exciting. It just brings me back to my old days. But I believe that we begin with one person, but true transformation demands collective shift. And it's interesting when we use a tool like coaching, which is so powerful from a one-to-one level. How do we take that to one-to-many and use a similar tool to see how that transformation really brings change, not just for the organization, for the community level? And I feel coaching becomes catalytic when it's rooted in leadership habits, when it gets intentionally moving from a spotlight to one person to a leader, but moving towards shared norms, moving towards peer coaching, moving towards real-time feedback loops. So we are encouraging each other to have those kind of conversations. Coaching is also known for powerful questions, right? What would happen if everyone empowered themselves to pause, reflect, and ask powerful questions all the time without an external agency doing that for them? Imagine how it becomes a systemic level operating system where decisions are made. It's not an event, a coaching event that's happening, but how decisions are made in the spirit of coaching. I think the magic happens is when leaders start holding a space of growth together. That's when organization shifts happen. That's the magical space that, as coaches, we'd want everyone in organizations to move towards.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. You introduced another factor, which it kind of linked to what I think Breeze was saying too, which is this peer coaching model, which is now becoming more and more popular, and I love, because to me, it's all about how do we support everyone in being that coach and understanding that they have that capacity. Of course, there's skill to learn, but they have that capacity, and we can be supporting each other on a learning journey, on a journey of transformation. So thank you for that, Sandra.
And Renee, if I may add to that, actually, Sandra, when you mentioned this, what immediately resonated for me was one of my experience in 2022. Exactly as you said, you applying coaching in a more systemic way. In the effort that I collaborate in my organization, what we did was actually essentially using the peer coaching model, but in a very digital way and more focused on a certain topic, and apply that to a few hundred colleagues within my organization. And over 6 months, we have received like heartwarming feedback. If I may use a couple of minutes to share, Renee,
Sure.
you know, one of the key philosophies that I believe in let's say any OD effort is sense and response, right? So essentially, what I see the most sustained efforts actually come from the organization, come from within. It's not like one leader having a great idea. It's really about what's the inner wisdom from a system, so that we could bring that inner wisdom from colleagues within for this to spread. So I see my job as an OD person to be the catalyst, more of a catalyst to bring that out. And in one of the large scale surveys involving more than 2,000 colleagues, we found out one of the key aspects was clarity of purpose. And we chose exactly that topic for peer coaching efforts involving those a few hundred colleagues who, freely sign up. So that's really, from my personal experience, how we applied coaching in a more systemic way, but really really bringing that sort of driver's seat within the organization and within, to bring that to many, many colleagues in
Breeze,
their
can you
hands.
say a little more about, because when you're looking at a whole system and the ability to sense into the system and respond to what you're sensing within a system, so to really have a deeper sensitivity to what's happening in an organization rather than a top-down view, can you say a little more about what you did there and how coaching was used for that?
Right. Well, I mean, that's really the experience I had in 2022 was that, based on the belief of sense and response, we used organizational network analysis. So in that way, we reached out to 2,500 colleagues and with pulse surveys, right? So basically, at large scale, we could collect. I think I remember one of the key questions was, and that thanks to your philosophy of human thriving, Renee, I think we asked the question, what actually help you thrive in a VUCA environment? Because we are operate in very increasingly VUCA environment. So this was one of the several questions we asked, and the overwhelmingly one key factor that people answer was that in an increasingly VUCA environment, if I'm clear of my personal purpose, then I feel very grounded. Yeah. And if I could actually link that personal purpose with my work, then I feel thriving, despite whatever is happening, very difficult market environment, turbulence in the society, etc. But with these two factors, especially clarity of personal purpose, I feel I'm grounded and I could feel thriving. So we chose that topic. So in that sense, we didn't know what would come out before we sent out the ONA survey. When it came out, we basically thought, oh, how could we catalyze that effort to help more colleagues gain more clarity, and also, leveraging those colleagues who are already thriving in their environment, so that we bring their wisdom. These are, we got hundreds of answers, and there are hundreds of answers that when I read them, I felt so excited that, how to catalyze that. And peer coaching on a digital platform focused on a key topic. That was how we used. Back
That's
to you,
wonderful.
Renee.
I'm hearing a very generative cycle, a virtuous cycle of
Yeah, indeed.
really understanding and sensing into the organization in a different way. Particularly, you were asking many questions, but one of the questions was around what enables you to thrive, which is core to all of our work on this call. So, what enables you to thrive? And based on that, it helped you clarify for this system at this period of time, purpose, being very clear about purpose is important. And then you used a peer coaching model to support people in operating from their purpose, getting clear about their purpose and operating from their purpose, which in turn supports, the culture in the organization, a thriving culture in the organization. So that's a beautiful cycle that I can see the map in my head right now of that. That is wonderful.
Renee, can I tangent on that actually on the peer coaching
We might just stay on
topic?
that first question this entire time.
I swear I'll help you move on. But I was just thinking, it's such a beautiful example, Breeze, and when we start to also democratize coaching, and I think that's one of the points is that traditionally when we think about it, it's senior levels who have really benefited from coaching and from significant coaching. And what I love about the opportunities for peer coaching models is it does democratize it out into other levels in organizations. And there's an organization I'm working with at the moment who has done that and is doing it, but they're actually starting with their emerging leader cohort. So, even without going downwards, they're starting to go up because they recognize what an important cohort that is, and the power of when, they're invested in, when they take that up with them, they can have a greater impact. And how do they build coaching skills at that level, start to build coaching skills, but also then when they go back to their teams, how do they start to, just as leaders, start to ask more questions, going back to the point that Sandra made before, about just a different behavior of leadership that we are starting with at that level, which I think is incredibly powerful. And we're talking about organizations who are wanting to really enhance and support agency and autonomy in their people. This is such a beautiful lever to use to be able to help with that in quite a tangible way.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, what have you, as you're working with that organization, what needed to be in place to create the conditions where the peer coaching model, the democratization of coaching, could even occur?
Yes, it's such a great point. And it's an organization who has a very quite a different set of leadership expectations and behaviors, where they encourage things to be messy. It's literally written in one of their value statements, to let it be messy. And so when leaders come into the organization, they're quite distinctive about the conditions that they want to create and encourage, and how they do it from a system point of view, with some of the structure and rituals, etc., and hard coding, as well as how the behaviors that they expect to see and what they support. So when things don't go to plan, or don't go as expected, or they don't get the outcomes that they want, they will always do retros on it, but encourage the conversation around the learning that they've all had and share that out. So it's quite they've been quite deliberate in being able to play that through and say, what do we need to do to actually prove that we want to see this in our culture, not just say it on the wall? And what will this look like when we do this, and when people, behave in this way, or when they get things wrong, or, when we ask them to do things, what do we then have to do to be able to support that going? So I think that that's what they're trying to create. And so having these emerging leaders, especially the ones that just walk in the door to the organization laterally, that's the first thing they hear and see.
Yeah.
And then we go through this model. So, you're coming into, for them, that culture.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So there's already an ethos there for messiness, which I love that. If they've got that written somewhere to say be messy, it's like, okay, yes, that's so wonderful, because what a place of potential creativity and innovation,
Yes.
and really experimentation. So be messy, and then they already have practices in place for learning from work. Some of that,
Yes.
after action reviews and practices that they do to kind of understand. And so that creates a nice container within which
Yes.
they can even onboard new leaders into leadership and grow them. That's really wonderful. That is really wonderful. Sandra, did you want to add anything, since we're going on round 2 on this first question? Anything you want to add there?
There's so much to add, but I think both Breeze and Caitlin really pushed the pedal a lot on peer coaching. I think that's really critical. But I just wanted to play the other side as well. It's important to get that right as well. And the space to create is, I feel that the organization needs to be at a certain maturity level to actually play peer coaching really well. Otherwise, it could just be a mentoring session. There could be internal dialogues. There could be vested interests. It's important to get the organization in a place. What Caitlin was talking about, the messiness, and the messiness also, for me, needs to have some bit of container to it. Otherwise, it can just, explode wherever it needs to do. What we often do is, when we want to start an intervention or partnership with an organization, we actually build that container of messiness. So we take 2 days, get the leaders in, and in a safe space, try and have them create that kind of mess, have them surface conflicts, get them into a state of reflection and receiving. which takes time. Because in an organization, we often work at two dimensions. And mostly the first one, which is more transactional, more neck up, more thinking, more strategic. What we don't usually operate on a conscious level is the neck down, which is the emotional intelligence, the feelings, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, my fears, my anxieties, my hopes, my dreams, my purposes. Interestingly, 80% we operate from there, but we don't bring that to the surface. And once we get into that space of who we are, why we're operating, and what Breeze was talking about, that purpose and what is fueling for me, then we start expanding that for my team. So that's when I truly become a peer coach, because then I connect with my peers' purpose and how do I, take this together, and hopefully some way there's just one North Star for all of us. So that's usually our start point in before we get into the peer coaching itself. How do we create that space for people to reach the next level of maturity, where I start zooming in what's in everyone's neck down level, our purpose, our fears, our vulnerabilities, and then in that we're all equal in our imperfect perfections, and then take it from there. So I'm going to pause here. There's so much more, but I want to allow you to go to the next question to Renee.
Oh, that's fine. This is actually a beautiful conversation. We could stay on that first question and just have this dialogue. But I do want to ask what challenges you're seeing to shifting into a model of coaching that is more democratized, that is more about using coaching as a systemic lever for culture change, that is more about using coaching even to support an organization in moving beyond a an old way of thinking of measuring a company based just on profit, but looking at their larger impact, such as to people and the planet. So, what are the challenges that you have found so far? And I really encourage the participants, not just the panel, but the participants, because all of you are showing up with ideas too. Like, what challenges are we facing when it comes to using this incredible transformative lever of coaching in a much broader way? Breeze, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. I would, you know, I I would also echo what Sandra said. I think from my experience, the primary factor that needed to be there is actually a culture, a leadership culture that actually allows this to
Mm,
happen. I mean, I'm conscious I'm using the word allow while I just actually share the democratize effort, etc. And that was a time, in 2022, me and my colleague and colleagues were in a like leadership environment that very much encouraged experimentation and innovative approaches. I feel that's really important to have that container. That's really number one challenge that I could see. And this
yeah.
can be reverted too. So, one question that's in my mind is how to really have such an effort to sustain in an organization.
Mhm.
When leaders change, when environments change, etc. Right?
Yeah.
I think other challenges could also be there. Is exactly as you said, Sandra, is how to skillfully initiate this. Because people, if we talk about large scale peer coaching, people are in different conscious states, etc. So what we did was really wanting to catalyze those wisdom within the system to help mix those let's say insights and be more deliberate in designing the effort. So because then we provided actually powerful questions to guide the peer coaching effort in a digital platform. So actually, in that way, we are essentially bringing this powerful questions mechanism in a deeper level to the peer coaching. So I think, I mean, just to sum up, maybe the most, I would say the most important challenge is really the leadership culture overall. And
Yeah.
then the second would be how to skillfully initiate such systemic effort. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate the second one very much, and I appreciate the first one probably even more because how important it is to have that right the environment that's going to be supportive, that's going to be the right container. And I heard you say the word revert. You know, what happens? How do you sustain this? That to me is even another challenge when people change in an organization. Um, what remains? Because I've been in certain situations where the culture actually continues and can continue holding space for the coaching work. And I've also been in situations where key leaders change and everything falls apart. So yeah, I'm gonna
If I,
go,
yeah,
Breeze, I'm gonna go to
Renee, if I may, yeah, sorry.
I'm gonna go to Sandra, Breeze, and see
Yeah.
what she has to say about this, and then we'll come back.
I think that's a brilliant question, Renee. Is what are the barriers organization face and challenges face to create this coaching culture, systemic impact? There are three reasons in my mind. And before I start, I truly feel that every partner, every organization that we work with has a true intention of bringing in the change and making impact happen. But the gap between intention and impact, there's a huge different distance between intention and impact. And for me, the three biggest barriers I come across is first, coaching till date is seen as remedial.
Hmm.
So unless there's a founder or somebody who is self-sponsoring it, they'll come and say, okay, I'm good, take me to great. But typically in organizations, when you are taken in as a coach, it's usually remedial. There are certain things we need to work on and have the leader to improve. And that's the mindset that coaching is seen in an organization. Number two is leaders lack the first-hand experience of the true impact and magic that coaching can bring to a system at an organic level, not necessarily on one-on-one. And the third, which is the most difficult to get through, is systemic immune resistance. Whenever we start something new, there is a lot of resistance. And this is a new slow paced. You don't see results overnight. This takes time, but it's deep and lasting. But when something comes new, there's a lot of resistance in terms of rejecting transformation. There's a lot of valid reason, cost, time, environment, ecosystem, all of that comes in the way. And this system, immune system, kind of bridges or at least breaks that distance between the intention and impact. And it comes through, whatever, passive compliance, saying yes, sabotaging change agents for whatever reasons they come across. In my mind, how do you solve it? I think there are no right answers. We're figuring it along the way. And in some cases, it works. In some cases, I've seen not work as well. But I think the biggest one that we need to look at is name it early. Help leaders spot where the resistance is coming from. It could be from themselves, could be from other agents, and look at it as a sign of transition stress. Not necessarily they need to battle or get rid of, but it's a transition stress that we are going through. And how do we overcome it? And how do you find where the transition stress is? Look at who benefits from the current system and go towards there, because that's where you'll get the maximum resistance and the resistance strongest. So look at exploring that area. And looking at resistance as data, not failure. So again, going back to it's nobody standing up, everyone has the right intention, but looking at, okay, the data is coming from here, what do we need to do to make it more comfortable? How, as coaches, what we can do is I've experimented, my team has experimented, is in group reflection. We kind of, in this 2-day lab that I was talking about in our synergizing strengths, we get the group there, and typically they are CXO leaders, they are leaders who are change agents for the organization. We help them create a space where they can surface invisible resistant patterns, not only of the organization, of themselves, which they're not even aware of. Where is resistance coming from within me? Where is it coming from the organizations? What do I need to do? Is there some behavior that I can focus on? Because that's the first step, and that's in your control. right? And then lastly, we look at how do we equip these leaders to lead through the resistance, through it and not around it. Because there's a first interaction. How do I go around it? How do I change it? How do I remove it? But the answer is going through it, which is the messy bit, the most uncomfortable, challenging all your demons at the same time. But the answer is just beyond that resistance. So that's, I think, the few steps that we are experimenting to overcome these barriers.
That is wonderful. And thanks for the specifics, things that you and your team are trying and experimenting with. I appreciate that. Caitlin, how about your sense of barriers or challenges?
Sandra took the exact words out of my mouth when I when she said it's traditionally be seen by as a remedial intervention, and that's exactly what I was going to say is, you know, like it or not, and I suspect that everyone in this room is well on team coaching, but we know that we haven't influenced everyone on that quite yet. So we have the reality of that, which leads me to think about sometimes when it's better to go where the energy is on things. And you know, I had an example of an organization I was working with about 2 years ago, and we tried to introduce a team coaching model. And you know, I thought it was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and you know that it was going to make such an enormous difference to enabling teams to help themselves, and it didn't get up as an organizational intervention. It didn't get up, and it was going to be very low cost. So I was confused as to why it wouldn't get up if it didn't cost anything, but it didn't, and it, you know, for whatever reason, it wasn't the time. And when I think back now about what would I've done differently, because I still believed in it so desperately, and I thought maybe I should have just kind of launched it and put it there and encouraged the people who I knew were wanting that type of, you know, support and change and, you know, that type of thing within their teams, and had just worked where the energy was and not tried to actually do it top down, but more organically start in patches where people were willing and they really wanted to be in there and have that, and then have that organically flow. So I think that that's what I would do now if I'd have been in the same situation. I think the other barrier that, you know, again, us all in this room are going to just groan at a little bit is the ROI and the value, and particularly in cost constrained environments. We know that learning, leadership development, all of those things is, you know, one of the first things to get cut from budgets. And, you know, I think we know the value. People who have had great coaches or have been in great coaching experiences know the value, but I still think that there is a role to get better at being able to quantify some of the value, because we know that that is a condition that, you know, organizations who are not on team coaching will still want to see. And I think we have collectively a bit of work to do to be able to really, you know, talk about that.
That is great. That's great. I want to reinforce the comments you made about going where the energy is. You know, with the teamwork, you said if you were to have done that project differently, you might have gone where more of where the energy is instead of this top-down approach. And I think about that's such a coaching principle. It's a coaching principle, you know, when you're working
Yes.
with someone, which is, or a team, is to what are they most motivated to move toward, rather
100%.
than pushing. So
Yes.
what is the system in front of us most motivated to do something about, because it means something to them? And that's such a fundamental coaching principle, no matter what level, I think, of coaching. And I'm going to add a challenge here because I was thinking about these questions too. And the challenge that I would add when it comes to thriving and looking at thriving is my sense is that many people, many teams, many organizations, and whoever's holding space, stewarding that organization, haven't actually thought about what does it mean for us to thrive? What does it mean for us to thrive? I know that's a very simple question, but for most people, you ask that question and um, you might get deer in the headlights. For some of us, that kind of just, wow, I'm not sure. Most of us have worked in environments for so long that are fast-paced, highly charged, highly stressed, that we haven't paused long enough to ask the question. So just that alone, when it comes to shaping, like as Bree said in her project, asking that kind of question and then finding out, wow, really getting clear about purpose is going to be the lever, is where we're going to start. So I think helping people have a new way of thinking about thriving itself, that it's usually well beyond how they're performing today, and more fulfilling, more satisfying, more meaningful and purpose-driven, as well as getting results. So I just wanted to bring that up as another challenge. And I think it's a good challenge. I think it's a challenge we're all up for. Like, we wouldn't be here if we weren't up for that challenge. I want to open it up to the other people that are a part of this conversation that I'm seeing on the screen. I'm wondering, Jen, Jess, Sandy, Sarah, Avinash, if you have perspective, Amy, if you have Jessica, which my joy today is to see Jessica Grossmeyer's name written Jessica, because I love it. On my screen, it says Jessica. So what what perspectives, what insights, what are your perspectives about challenges, barriers that you're seeing in regards to coaching having a more systemic impact, not just being used as a one-on-one transformative pathway?
I'm
Anyone?
happy to jump in because
Yes,
I
please, Jen.
thought fascinating. Thank you for such great questions to ponder. And I immediately kind of went down the route that a lot of this conversation has been on, thinking about the shift towards team, peer, group coaching. But then as you've been talking, I've also come back to thinking about the importance of one-on-one coaching in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because I think I reflect on Bree's, your comment earlier on around not just expanding self-awareness, but systems awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it, and what I'm experiencing with the leaders that I work with, when we think about the systemic, like how do we use coaching for the systemic, is that there is a complexity gap. And so the more senior that leaders get, and there's research, I'm collaborating with a researcher at ANU at the moment who's about to release research to say that our ability to cognitively deal with the complexity that's in front of us, the more senior you get, the bigger the gap is. There's less and less leaders that are able to deal with the complexity that they see. And so therefore, part of where I've gone in this conversation is to say there is a role for us to shift the tools that we are using in coaching to help leaders be better prepared to lean into and understand the complexity within their systems.
Nice. Yeah.
And actually yesterday, and I've got a recency bias, we did a session with some leaders in a masterclass around what does complexity coaching look like? Moving away from that traditional model that we teach leaders, let's take the grow conversation and have a really great conversation. Actually, how do you use those coaching opportunities to help those that you're coaching better understand the complexity within the system as they're seeing it and what their challenges are? Noting that one of the biggest failures of leaders is to see the challenge that they're dealing with as technical and not adaptive in nature.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm sitting with that at the moment. I'm so excited by team coaching, but I also don't want to miss the opportunity with one-on-one.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad you brought your recency bias experience into the session. Thank you for that.
I
Amy.
just wanted to
Yeah.
add, sorry, if that's all right, on Jen's comment.
Sure.
I feel one can't do without the other. You need to have both team and individual for the magic happen. It's not just only team and only individual. I remember when initially we used to only do individual coaching, and then we introduced this team, and we used to at that time not call it team coaching, we used to call it the lab, and get them and have a group coaching for 2 days, 2 full days, and then continue the coaching sessions. And I had a lot of coaches do individual, and they would say, what took me 12 sessions is taking me 4 sessions now for the change to happen because of that 2-day lab. And I know we've also had only the lab and not individual coaching, and I could see there's a difference in results. And when we do both together is when the true magic, true change, thriving happens. We move from a team to individuals. So Jen, yes, absolutely. Individual coaching has to be there to make it happen.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. Amy, you had gotten off of mute. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, well, thank you so much for this insightful discussion. These questions and topics are very much on top of my mind. I published a story in the New York Times this week about buyer's transformation, asking 100,000 people to self-organize. Breeze, I know you've worked with Bill Anderson at Roche. And so I'm wondering how you uniquely design a coaching culture to support an organization's strong commitment to decentralization, self-management, where you're asking people, you're really shifting the power dynamics in a more dramatic way, asking people to make decisions in really different ways. And so, Breeze, this question is really for you. I know we've talked a little bit before, but would love to just hear some more insights, because the feedback I got on the story was everyone had questions about the coaching in the organization and what that looks like.
Well, thank you, Amy. And beautiful article. I just read it before I come into the call. I'm a big fan of Bill Anderson. To answer, I mean, maybe I'll just share some reflections of your question. In the last 4.5 years, how I experienced the culture, I would say, sort of preparing the soil almost, right? I have this beautiful plants growing analogy. So I love to use the gardening analogy on organizational transformation. So I feel there's a lot there in the soil preparation. So how I experience the large scale, in embracing the coaching culture, is for a long time in having these rather decentralized cultures to start with. I think Roche had a really long history of already quite decentralized and very collaborative. Renee, we collaborated when we introduced the Be Well Lead Well pulse. So that's already kind of a heritage, and I think what Bill and others did in this process of transformation was really encouraging communities practice in coaching. So I think Roche is probably among the organization that I see most sort of leaders having coach trainings. Yeah, so going through 9 months coach trainings, throughout their career, and we're talking about hundreds, if not maybe 1,000, maybe more than 1,000. I definitely know more than 200 certified coaches within the coaching community. I'm part of the coaching community inside, and it is still active after many years. That I would say that's another factor of preparing the soil. So there is a deliberate effort in bringing coaching as a key element of transformation. So one of the leadership philosophy is VACC, visionary, architect, catalyst, and coach. So having, the belief is that in a time of VUCA, these kind of leadership qualities more needed in supporting the organization to grow. There are, as we are talking systemic efforts, in on top of my mind, I see many factors. I would say probably, still coming back to this garden analogy of preparing the soil and the leaders with the let's say consciousness level of Bill Anderson. I feel, I'm definitely very fortunate to have experienced such a transformational journey. And I think this is the one thing that I wanted to add, Renee, when we talk about this cultural revert or how do we sustain the culture. I think one of the very encouraging factor I see is that the impact these efforts left on individual people, individual leaders. I have interviewed leaders after 5 to 7 years that they have been through a transformational journey. And I asked them, what's left, what's the impact on you? What's left, right? People moved on. We have changed structure. We have changed leaders. What's different? And some comments were really so heartwarming, and in several cases, people say, this has been the most transformational time in my life, that I connected with my purpose. I changed the way I lead, and I'm embracing this principle in the rest of my life. In one case, it was 7 years after he has experienced this. And even when people leave to other companies, you see the case of Bill. Actually, people are bringing this philosophy into the society. So I actually feel rather hopeful that once we have experienced this, and Sandra, as you said, once we touched people to these steps, they are bringing these and they are flourishing in their own way, in their own path. So we are bringing these to the wider society.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
It's beautiful. I just wanted to share one reflection. Is I'm reminded of, and again, this is my lens, but the power of story. Like internally, you just need to share stories of success and challenges to show like this is authentic. And anyways, but again, journalist lens, storyteller lens, but I'm just reminded of how important that is too.
Yeah, Amy,
Beautiful. Thank you,
it
Amy.
actually is critical, because I know from our journey with Roche and Breeze and the whole coaching community there as well, the ability to create kind of the narrative and to allow people to look at the narratives driving them as individuals, driving them as groups working together, driving the organization, has been such a core part of that work too. And the coaching was instrumental for bringing that forward and allowing people to look at what stories are really driving us and what do we want to be driving us. So thank you for your question. And Breeze, thank you for the additional insight into what's been happening there. Jessica and Jess, I'm picking on you only because you got your video up, in case you have something that you want to.
Well, and Renee, I'm actually going to interrupt you. We only have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
And that is also when my dog starts barking, obviously. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And as I mentioned, there are a myriad of other ways we can answer your questions, but do want to make sure we end on time. And so I was just thinking maybe if there are any final thoughts from our panelists as we wrap up today, anything that just feels that needs to be said as we wrap up today's call, which is I can see it's just the beginning. This is, we could go on for a few hours. Yes, exactly. This is just the beginning of the conversation. So, Renee, I'll hand it back over to you, but just kind of wrapping up here as we end.
Yeah, well, I would love to hear Caitlin. Caitlin, why don't you go first? Anything that else you want to say to this community before we end tonight?
I think what I was just reflecting on then, when you were having that last point of the conversation, is how, organizations are more diverging at the moment than I think we have seen, and they have their own complexity in systems and cultures, which are really shifting away from others. And I think, we used to have a cleaner organizational landscape, which you could look at others and say, let's kind of, do what they're doing because they're similar to us. And I think more and more we get more complex in our internal systems, and there's a real opportunity to design well within them for systemic change, considering all of the things that we've talked about today, but that we're at a place where we can't really just kind of, copy and paste other interventions, because, the example that you just gave then is so specific, and it sounds so, well designed, beautifully designed to have such a long-lasting impact. And the amount of work that goes into those types of interventions, I think, can't be underestimated, but they're so well designed for those systems, the leaders within them, the behaviors and the cultures that they want to create. And I think that that's part of the opportunity, is to really, really understand what is different and what it does look like to thrive. To your earlier point, Renee, is so different now for the organizations, the leaders, the systems that we work within, that I think there's an even more opportunity to lean into that uniqueness and design well for change and for sustainability.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. Sandra, how about you? Any final comment for the group?
Yeah, I think we did have such rich conversation around systemic coaching and what the impact it has for organizations. And Breeze, Caitlin, Renee, and everyone here as well, Jen, I mean, Kate, all of you have brought such rich conversation. I'm a number one learner. I've got a lot of points as well from all of you. But I remember I started my talk here mentioning that we begin with one person when we are coaching, but the real transformation is when there's a collective shift. But I do want to add one more bit while we are walking away today, is that one person can also be the architect of the transformational shift. We may feel that it's a huge task or huge mountain to carry, and we need collective hands. Yes, we need collective hands, but you can also be the catalyst or the architect in making that happen. So what starts with me? That's a good question we can ask ourselves every time we want to reflect and pause is, what can I start? Where can I start? And how can I lead this process, which could eventually be huge? It could be transformative, it could be a change agent for the whole organization. So I would leave with, where can I start and what can I do?
Thank you, Sandra. And Breeze.
So I would go back to my core philosophies in my organizational work is to bring, authentic, mindful, and purposeful way of life. And I trust a lot in emergence, that in our systems, we do have the wisdoms within. And when we bring that core values and bring that into our daily life, we will make wonders. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Renee. Back to you.
And thank you, all of you. Thank you, Kate, for getting us organized and orchestrating this experience. And thank our panelists for just sharing your insights. And thank everyone who's part of this. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. We will make sure that we answer them, and we access the wisdom of the panelists to answer them as well. So have a good day, good evening, good morning.